Chewy, Chewy, look at the camera and say hi. No, stop licking my face. You gotta look. No, don't look at the wall. Look at the camera. There you go. Good boy. Hey everyone, I'm TM Sparrow, writer and homeschooling mom, and today I'm going to talk about plots. Everyone loves a good plot. No, not that kind of plot.
But Mr. Fluffykins.
I'm talking about a literary plot. In other words, the sequence of events that make up the main part of your story. Now, you can also have subplots, but I think we'll save that for another video. Now, if you're like me, you probably learned all about the elements of plot at some point during your school years. But just in case you, like me, have trouble remembering those things you learned in high school, let's have a quick review. No matter which type of plot you're using, they're all made up of the same 5 basic elements. Number 1, exposition. Put simply, this is where you introduce your characters, setting, and conflict. There are a lot of ways to do this, and just as many ways not to. But this is where your plot begins. Number 2, rising action. The plot thickens. The rising action is where you build the conflict that you introduced in the beginning. This is when you're building tension and excitement. Number 3, climax. This is the main plot point, the moment where everything explodes. The climax is the highest point of the story and usually leaves the reader wondering what's going to happen next. This is usually the most emotional part of the story, especially because it's the turning point. Number 4, falling action. This is the part of the story where things are winding down. It's time to resolve the conflicts and have your characters face the results of their choices. Number 5, resolution. Easy. The resolution is simply the ending of your story, regardless of whether your ending is happy or tragic. Oh boy, when I came up with the concept for this video, I thought it would be pretty simple. I mean, how many types of plots can there be, right? Well, the answer, as it turns out, is a lot. Scholars have spent a lot of effort trying to categorize books into rigid plot structure categories. So, depending on your source, there are anywhere from 3 basic plot types to over 1,000. The basic plot structure is very versatile, so there are probably an infinite number of possible plot types. Still, I think it's worth looking into the structure of the different plot types that have already been studied. I've said before that learning about story structure is important for writers, and I stand by that. One way to do that is to look at the different plot types and how they're structured. This way you can see how the elements of plot and structure work together to create a compelling story. You don't have to follow a rigid set of rules to create a good story, but it helps to know the framework before you start mixing things up. It's like when I'm cooking. I rarely, if ever, follow a recipe exactly as it's written. But I do look up a bunch of recipes and then create my own recipe based on what's in all those other recipes. For this video, I don't really want to go in depth on the structures and details of these plots. Instead, I would like to give you a brief overview of the different ways that people categorize the types of stories we write. William Foster Harris's The Basic Patterns of Plot lists 3 main types of plot. These are the happy ending, the unhappy ending, and the tragedy. These are fairly broad categories to sort stories into, which, in my opinion, completely disregards the complexities of many stories. Plus, the unhappy ending and the tragedy sound like they're basically the same thing. Part of the difference between the two is the magnitude of the outcome. A tragedy affects many more people on a much grander scale. But the main difference is that in a tragedy, the character attempts to do something that stems from excessive pride or ambition or some other character flaw. And as a result, the ending seems to have been determined more by fate than anything else. So that is a very simplistic view of plot that doesn't really offer much in the way of analysis of structure. Christopher Booker offers us a different analysis of plot archetypes. In the 7 basic plot points on why we tell stories, he lists the different types of plots as overcoming the monster, the quest, the voyage and return, rags to riches, the rebirth, comedy, and tragedy. Now, comedy and tragedy can also be used as genres, which is probably how many of us are used to thinking of them. But in terms of story structure, the comedy is marked by a structured series of mishaps, miscues, and misunderstandings, while the tragedy, as I noted before, is where the protagonist tempts fate and fate responds in a pretty big way. These plot types offer a narrower look at structure than the 3 basic plot types, and many stories could actually be categorized using both categories. For example, you could have an overcoming the monster or quest story with an unhappy ending, or they could have a happy ending. To give some well-known examples, Beowulf and Dracula are both overcoming the monster plots. Cinderella, The Prince and the Pauper, and The Little Princess are all classic rags to riches stories. The Lord of the Rings, The Lightning Thief, and Raiders of the Lost Ark are standard quests. Voyage and Return covers everything from Alice in Wonderland to Back to the Future and The Hobbit. Rebirth applies to both Pride and Prejudice and A Christmas Carol. A Midsummer Night's Dream, Much Ado About Nothing, and Bridget Jones' Diary are all comedies. And tragedy includes the likes of Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, The Portrait of Dorian Gray, and even Avengers: Infinity War. So, as you can see, there's a lot of variety in the types of stories that each of these 7 plots can be used to tell. There are many different ways to look at plot structure and categorize the different types of stories that can be told. I highly recommend looking into them and learning how they're structured. Ronald Tobias's book, 20 Master Plots and How to Build Them, which I keep on my desk, gives an even broader look at plot types. It ranges from some of the basic ones that I mentioned before, like the quest, to increasingly complex types of plot, such as revenge and metamorphosis. There's also George Pulte's The 36 Dramatic Situations, which skips right over the basics and dives into more specific concepts such as daring enterprise, fatal imprudence, erroneous judgment, and more. And there are so many more types of story structure to look at, such as the hero's journey. Honestly, I feel like there could be an infinite number of plots depending on how you try to categorize them. While I was doing some research for this video, I found an article that discussed a method that Kurt Vonnegut came up with that categorized plots by looking at the emotional structures of the story. So it broke them down by looking at the rises and falls of the emotional arc. So you had things like Icarus, which was rise, fall, or you could have a rise, fall, rise. I'll link that article in the description below because it's actually a really interesting read. Okay, that's where I'm going to leave it for this video. In the future, I want to try to do some videos where I can look at each of these plot types more in depth. You can let me know what your favorite plot type is in the comments down below.
I'm particularly partial to evil.
Out of all the ones I've mentioned, I think my favorite would have to be the Voyage and Return. And don't forget, you can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr. And if you want to see more, then don't forget to subscribe. I post new videos on Sundays. See you next time.
I'll take top fodder, take... Blah!
Hello, welcome to the new and improved bedroom. Oh, it's blue. It's called Novella Blue. Okay, today I'm going to talk about plots. Bleh.
I am a method actor.
Hey everyone, I'm TM Sparrow. No. Blah, blah, blah.
Evil laughter, take whatever.
The elements of plot. Aliens. Chewie! Don't look at me like that, I love you. There are a lot of different ways to do this. And just as many ways. Ow! I bit my tongue! But this is where your plot begins, and then in my head it's, when will my plot begin? Number 3. Number 3. Climax. Number 3. Climax. Ronald McDonald? Huh? Okay.
What about you, Mr. Fluffykins? What is your favorite type of play? Stop eating my hand!